For many generations, there has been a belief that was almost never questioned, that if a person has set foot in America, if they have made it to Germany, England, France, or Canada, then they will do everything possible to stay, because that's where there's more money, more opportunities, and a better future. But in 2026, something strange is happening. More and more immigrants are no longer looking to stay. They are selling their houses, close the account, end of work, packing up the luggage, and return to the place they once tried to leave. What makes this story confusing is this: America is still richer. Salaries in the West are still higher. Many European countries are still more stable. So, why are more and more people returning? And if this trend continues, it could completely change the way the world views the Western dream. In today's video, we will explore what is really happening behind the largest reverse migration wave in many years. For more than half a century, there has been a race that most of the world believes the outcome has been decided long ago. It is not a race about military power, nor is it a race about territory. It is a race to capture the best minds on the planet. If you are a talented engineer in India, a young doctor in Poland, a programmer in Vietnam, or a researcher in Brazil, the path to success seems to have only one direction. Go to the US, go to England, go to Germany, go to a place with top universities, the largest tech corporations, and salaries that your homeland can hardly compete with. For many years, the West has almost monopolized the four most important things: technology, education, career opportunities, and quality of life. The game seemed to be over before it even began, but this is the first turning point. That is only true when the gap between the West and the rest of the world is still too large. When an engineer in Bangalore earns a few $1,000s a year, while an engineer in California earns 10 times that. When the opportunity for startups in many countries is almost non-existent. When the internet hadn't connected everything like it does today. But in 2026, that picture is changing much faster than many people imagine. And the interesting thing is not because New York or London suddenly disappeared from the world economic map, but because the rest of the world has started to catch up. If you find this topic worth pondering, take a second to hit like and subscribe, because the next data might make you view global competition in a completely different way. Imagine this. 20 years ago, many people left their homeland as if boarding a single express train heading toward the future. And today, for the first time, many new stations have appeared. Bangalore is becoming a global technology hub. Warsaw is emerging as one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. Kuala Lumpur is attracting more and more international businesses. Ho Chi Minh City has become an important link in the global supply chain. Mexico City benefits from the wave of production relocation near the US border. The noteworthy point is that these cities do not need to surpass New York or London. They just need to narrow the gap enough for talented individuals to start asking the question, do I really have to live halfway around the world from my family anymore? And that is the biggest wow factor. The talent competition of 2026 is no longer a battle between rich and poor countries. It is becoming a battle between places that can offer a livable life. Because when salary is no longer the only factor, what was once considered secondary becomes the deciding factor. Time for family, the ability to buy a home, a sense of belonging, and a predictable future. But if this is just a change on the home front, then what is happening on the other side? What is causing the seemingly invincible advantage of the West to start showing cracks? That's where the story becomes much more interesting in the next part. But this is the time we need to completely reverse the familiar perspective on this story. When hearing that more and more immigrants are leaving the US and Europe to return to their homelands, the first reaction of many people is often, perhaps the West is in decline. It sounds reasonable, but if you look more closely, that might be an incomplete explanation. Because what is happening is not necessarily the West becoming poorer. What is more noteworthy is that many homelands of immigrants are becoming wealthier, more modern, and opening up more opportunities than ever before. Imagine leaving your homeland in 2005. At that time, the place you were born might still be lacking in jobs, with low wages, underdeveloped infrastructure, and limited opportunities for advancement. But if you go back in 2026, you might not recognize the place anymore. New tech districts are emerging, the airport is expanding, highways connect the cities, international corporations are emerging, the cafes are packed with young people discussing startups instead of just looking for ways to go abroad. The noteworthy point here is many immigrants today do do not return to the places they once left. They are returning to a completely different country. Take India as an example. For many years, the familiar image has been of talented engineers making their way to Silicon Valley. But now cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad are becoming global technology hubs. Many people who once worked in the US have realized that they can build a similar career closer to their families and with significantly lower living costs. Interestingly, the dream no longer bears the of leaving. For many young people, the new dream is to return, and this is not an isolated case. Poland used to be a place where millions of young people sought to move to Western Europe for work, but now the country's economy has developed so strongly that a very notable phenomenon has emerged. Not only are Poles returning, but people from Western Europe are also moving in to live and work. In Vietnam, the middle class is growing rapidly. Industrial zones are expanding, and more international corporations are establishing production bases. In Mexico, the wave of global supply chain relocation is bringing new opportunities that were unimaginable just a decade ago. This leads to a surprising conclusion. For most of the last century, the West resembled a high mountain that everyone had to climb. But by 2026, the world began to resemble a mountain range with many different peaks. And when there are more choices, people start asking very different questions. If I can earn 80% of my income, but only bear 50% of the living expenses, is that a better choice? If I can live near my parents, raise my children near their grandparents, and still have a good career, why should I be half a world away from my hometown? If you also notice this change in the place where you live, please share in the comments. Now, we will touch on something that many immigrants and even locals are feeling together, a strange paradox of the modern world. Income in many places is still increasing, but the feeling of wealth is decreasing. And that is when we step into the greatest trap of this era, the trap called high income. But then many immigrants began to realize something they had never thought of before. What they were concerned about was not the salary, but the actual amount left after all the bills are paid. And this is the high income trap that more and more people are talking about. For many years, the familiar image has been of an engineer earning $120,000 a year in the US, a technology expert in London, or a financial analyst in Frankfurt with a dream salary. Sounds very impressive. But then reality sets in. Rent, insurance money, healthcare costs, childcare expenses, tuition fees, tax, travel expenses, living expenses. Each individual expense may not seem too daunting, but when combined, they resemble dozens of small taps quietly draining the income reservoir each month. The first wow point is like this. In many comments under immigration videos, viewers no longer ask, "How much do you earn?" They ask, "How much do you keep?" That is a very significant shift in mindset. A person can earn $100,000 a year, but still feel financial pressure, while another person earns significantly less in their hometown, but has their own house, is close to family, and doesn't have to spend most of their income on fixed costs. It sounds paradoxical, but that's the calculation that more and more people are making for themselves. And this is the point that makes the story more interesting. This pain does not belong only to immigrants. Many natives in the US and Europe are also saying the same thing. In the comments we have seen, there are people who have lived in the US for decades, sharing that even their children born here find it difficult to achieve what the previous generation considered normal, buying a house. That is a very important psychological signal. Because when people start to doubt the next generation's ability to progress, the feeling of insecurity will be much greater than just worrying about this month's bills. The second wow factor lies here. Many immigrants do not return because they are unemployed or have failed. Some people still have good jobs, good incomes, and enviable resumes. They left because they realized that high income no longer automatically equates to high quality of life. Like running on the most modern treadmill in the world, you run very fast, very long, very hard, but in the end, you still stand still. If you have ever lived or worked in an expensive city, please share your thoughts in the comments. Does a high salary really bring a sense of wealth as many people think? And don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you find this data thought-provoking. Because in the next part, we will touch on something even more surprising than money. What is drawing many people back to their homeland may not be in their bank accounts, but in a very human need that money can hardly replace. But after all the numbers about salaries, taxes, house prices, or living costs, there is one interesting thing that keeps appearing repeatedly in many stories of those who decide to return. It has nothing to do with bank accounts not related to a six-figure salary, and it cannot be measured by economic charts either. What is pulling them back is often much simpler. Family, familiarity, and the feeling of belonging somewhere. There is a very nice saying, people can live far from home for opportunities, but it is very difficult to live far from home for a lifetime. When they are young, many people are willing to make sacrifices. They accept being away from their parents, accepting holidays where they can only make video calls through a screen, accepting the sight of my grandchild growing up through photos sent on the phone. At that time, the opportunities ahead were so great that all sacrifices seemed reasonable. But then time passed. Parents grow old, children grow up, and things that were once considered temporary began to stretch into many years, even decades. The wow factor here is that many immigrants return not when they fail, but when they succeed. They already have stable jobs. They have a good income. They have a life that many others are still pursuing, but then they realize something quite strange. They had built their careers, but they missed out on many moments that money couldn't buy. A family meal, one time taking my parents to the doctor, one afternoon grandparents played with their grandchild. These things do not appear in financial reports, but they show up a lot in life-changing decisions. And there's another factor that is less often mentioned. It is the invisible fatigue of always having to adapt. Different language, different culture, different way of communicating, different way of thinking. When you first arrive, everything is new and exciting. But after many years, quite a few people start to miss the feeling of stepping into a restaurant without having to explain who they are, hearing familiar phrases from their children, and living in an environment where they understand the unspoken rules without having to learn them all over again. It may seem trivial, but sometimes it is the smallest things that determine where people want to settle for the long term. The next point of interest is that when the homeland develops quickly enough, the emotional equation begins to change. Previously, the choice was often stay close to family, but with fewer opportunities, or go abroad for a better future. But if the homeland still offers job opportunities and an increasingly higher standard of living, then for the first time, many people no longer have to choose between the two. They can both build their careers and be close to the most important people in their lives. Perhaps that's why more and more people are realizing that success is not just about how much money you make. Success also means living in a place where you feel at peace when you wake up every morning. But the interesting thing is that this phenomenon is not only happening to immigrants. In the next section, we will see an even more surprising paradox. Even many people born and raised in the US are seeking the very same things in other parts of the world. And this is the moment when the story takes an unexpected turn that many people did not foresee. Throughout the video so far, we have been talking about immigrants leaving the US and Europe to return to their homeland. But the interesting thing is that it's not just them doing it. Even many people born and raised in the US are making very similar decisions. They don't return to their homeland because their homeland is right at their feet. Instead, they are looking for a new homeland. For many years, the world viewed America as the final destination. But nowadays, more and more Americans are moving to Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, Thailand, Vietnam, or many other countries with a lower cost of living. If you had heard this 20 years ago, many people would probably have thought it was a very rare phenomenon. But nowadays, it has become a familiar topic on forums, YouTube channels, and in countless real-life stories. The first point worth mentioning is here. Immigrants are returning to where they were born, while many Americans are seeking the very feeling that immigrants once sought when they came to America. What is noteworthy is that the motivations of these two groups are strikingly similar. An Indian engineer returned to Bangalore because he wanted to be closer to his family and reduce the pressure of living costs. An American moving to Mexico said the same thing. A family returned to Poland because they wanted to buy a house and have more time for their children. An American family moving to Costa Rica shares almost the same reason. Different nationality, different language, different culture, but the same calculation. How to have a more balanced life. This is the second wow factor. In many comments under the videos on this topic, people no longer argue much about which place is richer. They started talking about where life is more bearable. That's a very big change. In the last century, success was often measured by how much money you made. But nowadays, more and more people measure success by different questions. Do I have enough time for my family? Do I feel secure about the future? Do I have to keep running just to stay in place? And that leads us to a very interesting contrasting image. There are those who once left Mexico to seek opportunities in the US, while some Americans moved to Mexico in search of a better quality of life. There are Asians who once dreamed of the West, while some Westerners choose Southeast Asia as a place to retire or work remotely. The world no longer operates according to one-way flows as it used to. It is becoming a multi-directional network where people continuously reassess what is truly important to them. If you find this phenomenon interesting, please share your thoughts below and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the less discussed perspectives on the ongoing global changes. And now we will move on to a much bigger question. Perhaps this is no longer a story about immigration. Perhaps that is what makes 2026 noteworthy. Now is the time for us to take a step back and look at the whole picture from above. Because if we only look at the headlines, it's easy to think this is a story about immigration. People coming, people leave, the country receives people, the country loses people. But the deeper we look, the more we realize that immigration is just the tip of the iceberg. The real story lies in a much larger competition. That is the competition for quality of life. In the 20th century, countries mainly competed to attract labor. Who has more jobs? Who pays higher wages? Who has a larger economy? That's almost a winning formula. But as we move into 2026, the game is changing. Nowadays, a country can create millions of jobs, but if people feel they cannot buy a house, struggle to raise children, or do not see a clear future for the next generation, then those economic advantages begin to lose their strength. The point to ponder is this. In many surveys and online discussions, people are increasingly asking less, how much can I earn? And increasingly ask more, how can I live? That is an extremely important change, because when the criteria for measuring success change, the global competitive landscape changes as well. A country does not need to be the richest in the world to become attractive. They just need to help the middle class feel like their life is moving forward. A family can buy a house, can save money, being able to raise children without constantly worrying about costs. It sounds simple, but those seemingly ordinary things are becoming the most valuable strategic assets of the 21st century. Not stopping there, we also have quite an interesting paradox. In the past, people often talked about brain drain when talented individuals left their homeland for more developed economies. But now, many countries are starting to worry about another issue: how to retain their own citizens. Not only do immigrants have more choices, natives also have more choices. Remote work, the digital economy, and global connectivity have made relocating much easier than before. In other words, today's workers are like customers who can choose from a wide variety of life packages around the world. And that is perhaps the biggest insight of the whole story. The real crisis is not immigration. The real crisis is when more and more people feel that the gap between the effort they put in and the quality of life they receive is becoming too large. When that feeling arises, they will start looking for other options, regardless of where they were born. If you're still watching, let us know in the comments. In your opinion, what will be more important in 2026, a high salary or a balanced life? And don't forget to like, subscribe if you enjoy perspectives beyond the usual headlines. In the final part of the video, we will arrive at the most thought-provoking question. It's not about how many people are leaving, but what will happen if more and more people no longer believe that the best future exists in only one place. And perhaps, after all that we have analyzed, the most thought-provoking question is not how many immigrants are leaving the US or Europe. That number will change over the years with each economic cycle, each policy, and each phase of the world. The much bigger question is, what happens when more and more people no longer believe that the best future exists in just one place? For most of the past century, the world resembled a great river flowing in only one direction. Millions of people left their homeland to seek out some of the top economic centers. That was the logic of that era. But the year 2026 is showing a different picture. That river hasn't disappeared. It is splitting into hundreds of small branches. Some people are returning to India, some people return to Poland, some people choose Mexico, some people move to Southeast Asia, some people stay where they are, but completely change their perspective on success. Perhaps what is ending is not the American dream, nor the allure of Europe. What is ending is the idea that there is only one path to a better life. And when that belief changes, everything else changes too. Nowadays, a talented engineer in Bangalore, a founder in Warsaw, a technology expert in Ho Chi Minh City, or an entrepreneur in Mexico City all have opportunities that the previous generation could hardly imagine. The world is becoming more multipolar, not only in terms of the economy, but also in terms of living opportunities. That is both a challenge and an opportunity for all countries. But this is the final question worth leaving for each of us. If money is no longer the only factor determining where people want to live, if a career is no longer enough to retain the best people, if more and more people start prioritizing family, community, stability, and quality of life, then what will countries have to compete with in the future? Perhaps the biggest race of the 21st century will not be about who has the tallest buildings or the largest economy, but rather who can create the most livable place for ordinary people. Today's story is not just about immigrants. It is about a question that of people around the world will have to answer for themselves in the coming years. Where is home really? And that is the story of why more and more immigrants are leaving the US and Europe to return to their homelands in 2026. In your opinion, is this just a temporary trend or a sign of a major shift in how people choose where to live and build their future? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. I always read and look forward to hearing perspectives from people who are living, working, or have experienced life in different countries. If you enjoy in-depth videos analyzing economics, society, and trends that are changing the world, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. And a small note, this video is made for the purpose of analyzing and discussing social trends based on stories, public opinions, and reference sources at the time of production. The content is not intended to attack, criticize, or represent the entire experience of any country, community, or individual. The reality may vary depending on the circumstances, region, and individual experiences. Thank you for taking the time to watch. See you in the next video.